It's good to see so many people here. First thing on Monday morning. I'm glad we weren't sure whether anyone would be here yet, but this is great. Welcome to the great debate, Hands On, Hands Off. I'm Casper Hewitt. I'll be chairing the session this morning. You will probably have read the blurb, but I shall go through that in a moment. Just to let you know what the structure is going to be, the idea of this debate is we give most of the time over to having a conversation with you, the audience. So what I'll do is we'll just have very short introductions from our speakers, just 6 minutes each. I'll give them a couple of minutes then just to respond to each other's initial remarks. But then I'll go out to the floor. So we'll have around about an hour of discussion in which you can join in. And it's not a matter of one question and come back to the panel. What I'm going to do is encourage you to make points and ask questions from the floor, several at a time. Those of you who have been to one of our debates before will have seen this, but for those of you who haven't, that's how it's going to work. If I could ask everybody to turn phones on silent, that would be much appreciated. However, we have got tweets and so on going on, so if you're on the Twitter sphere, then please do tweet about the debate if you've got anything you'd like to comment on. There's a tag which you can see on the screen there, which is #TGD18. There's also the #EGU18 one, which is being used for the conference. And you'll see at the bottom, there is actually a tiny URL /TGD18 where we've got a bit of a poll going, just for a bit of fun really, to see what people think, which asks the question that is posed by this debate. Should geoscientists be hands-on or hands-off in policy and politics? So you can answer yes, no, or undecided, probably at the end of the debate rather than during it, but we'll see. We'll see if people contribute during, then that's fine. Okay, so the reason we posed this was thinking about how in recent years there's been a growing distrust of experts in the public imagination, and that's been expressed in debates from Brexit to the US presidential election and many others besides. And it gives rise to serious questions about the role of scientists in policy making and the political sphere. Now, as geoscientists, our disciplines can have a real impact on the way humanity organises itself. So we pose the question, what should our role in that be? And there are serious tensions here between the desire for our knowledge to have a real impact and make a difference, and the need for scientific detachment and objectivity, and respect for broader perspectives and for democracy itself. So we've posed a few questions. We may or may not answer them in the course of this session, we shall see. And they are that should geoscientists restrict themselves to knowledge generation and stay out of the policy world, which is one view, or should we be getting involved and making change happen? Should our voices as experts be heard louder than others? Or does evidence-based policy actually undermine democracy? And ultimately, should we be hands-on or hands-off? So those are the questions. I shall introduce our great panel of speakers. We have on my right Dr. Elena Lopez-Gunn, who is the founder and director of iCatalyst and a visiting fellow at the University of Leeds in the UK. Elena did her PhD at King's College London and holds a master's from Cambridge University and a master's in investigative journalism, data and visualization from the University of Juan Carlos I with El Mundo newspaper. She was an associate professor at IE Business School and a visiting senior fellow at the London School of Economics as Alcoa Research Fellow. Is that correct? Alcoa, yes. Elena has collaborated with a number of organisations, including UNESCO, FAO, UNDP, EU, DG Research and Innovation, lots of other letters, and various universities and river basin agencies, the Environment Agency, EA, in the UK, and various other private sector companies and NGOs. So she's worked with everybody. She's published on a range of topics, mainly related to water security, social innovation, collaborative decision-making, water governance, evaluation of public policy, knowledge management and transfer. Her current main focus is on climate change adaptation and the role of green infrastructure, as well as groundwater strategic management. In the middle of our panelists is Minnie Jane. She's the operations director of the Flow Partnership, which has revived 7 rivers through community action in arid areas of Rajasthan in India. The principles of this work in India are proving to be beneficial to understanding and finding solutions to floods in the UK. Minnie is an editor of the Holistic Science Journal, and she also helps coordinate a series of workshops called Process and Pilgrimage, which explore the relation between science and spirit through dialogues on knowing, knowledge, and experience. Minnie's skill is in bringing unlikely combinations of people together in order to bring about the real action needed to enable change in complex systems. Her driving force has always been in keeping the focus on the search for deeper spiritual meaning of life to aspire to that which is higher than ourselves. Her work has always tried to initiate and connect grassroots level movements in India, which is where she originally comes from, and in the UK, where she lives now. Her motivation is to enable a voice for the poor, the marginalized, and the dispossessed using all her abilities. And last but not least, we have Paul Quinn, who you may notice isn't Gemma Carr, who was actually was booked. So Paul, who is one of the co-conveners, kindly stepped in her place because she was unable to come. She's not very well. Paul is a senior lecturer in catchment hydrology at the University of Newcastle. His research interests focus on catchment instrumentation, GIS, and modelling. The work includes implementing a wide range of soft-engineered interventions for diffuse pollution management and flood risk mitigation. Equally, the work includes liaison with catchment stakeholders and regional and national policy bodies. He has worked closely with DEFRA and the Environment Agency and many rural organisations and NGOs. Paul actively promotes the topic of catchment systems engineering as a proactive method to solve environmental problems. In 2016, he was appointed as a special advisor to the Environment, Food and Rural Affairs Committee in the UK on future flood prevention. In 2015, NERC, that's the Natural Environment Research Council in the UK, awarded him an industrial fellowship at Arup with the broad goal of delivering national flood management to industry. And in 2015, he also won the ICE Robert Stevenson Award for the Belford Catchment Management Scheme. So we've got a great panel and a great audience, I'm sure, so I'm looking forward to hear what all you say as well. But we shall go to the panel first. I shall give you 6 minutes. There's a clock there, so the clock is ticking. Let's go.
Okay.
Is that on?
Hello? Can you hear me? Yes. Okay. Well, I guess my life experience, as you've heard, is actually a person has moved very much from a hands-off to a very much a hands-on approach. And I think my starting comment would be actually my conclusion, which is even if you're hands-on or hands-off, I think you really have to reflect on it as a scientist, or even if you are moving into the policy world, you have to really reflect now on the role of science. I think, as Casper said, particularly we live in very turbulent times. I think they're going to get even more so because we are in exponential times. So I think in this world of fake news, there's also the danger of fake science or using science. So I think increasingly it's actually an ethical question for all of us as scientists. What is the role of science? And you cannot, I think, any longer not engage with the debate. I think as a scientist, you have to understand that your research has got policy implications. You have, I think, increasingly to be able to argue why your research is important and why it should be funded. Because particularly in a world of shrinking kind of public money, particularly, you have to really make a case, because I think otherwise the public, when you have rival competing problems like education or health, then we have to really be very strong in our arguments as to why science is so increasingly, well, it's so relevant to solve actually these problems like education or health. Also, you have to learn to speak a different language. We use a lot of jargon in science. You have to be able to translate your research so it's understood by, say, a taxi driver or a woman in a shopping mall or in a supermarket. And for example, I was just having a conversation with Paul just before we started. In this context, uncertainty, for example, is a classic. You know, how do you translate uncertainty? And I think in the context of climate change, that's a classic example, you know, because politicians, you know, or a mayor has to make a decision. And when you say to them that is, you know, 40% up, 40% down, they just kind of look at you blankly. You know, what do they do? Yeah. So I think you really have to reflect on how you explain the uncertainty. I think, for example, flooding is a classic example, you know, on this return period. Can you translate that return period into something that the people would actually understand? Enthuse people. You have to really engage people, you know, and make them, in a way, love science like you do. And then there's lots of exciting things happening at the moment with science, like where you can actually engage with people directly. And I think Minnie will give us fantastic examples on that. But citizen science, you know, get engaged with your local school, you know, on kind of school projects, you know. I was going to mention, I mentioned to Casper, my 12-year-old daughter, for example, I live in Madrid, and the regional government is going to do a conference like this with the Museum of Sciences. So they're going to have a conference where she will have to present and she will have to do everything like, you know, small, they're a team, you know, so they're starting to understand. And I think this new generation coming is going to be fundamental, and you're part of that. You're part of preparing, you know, good, robust scientists to actually understand how to explain science. And also, as I said, citizen science, you know, I don't think we can no longer believe that our knowledge has some kind of primacy over other types of knowledge. I think we will actually hear Mimi kind of give us very good, or even Paul, very good examples about respect, you know, for other types of knowledge. Also, in relation to the hands-off, I think you should not be naive. When your research moves into the policy world, it will mutate. And it's very, very likely or possible in certain circumstances to be manipulated as well. And that's where you really, I think this is where your ethics really come to the fore as to, do not, I mean, you might get angry, you might get cross, but just be aware that that will happen and be prepared for that. So, for example, and also look deeper than other people. For example, I remember I'm quite proud of one of the papers that I did with a number of people on the illegal water footprint in Spain. And part of the reason why I wanted to look into it is because when you actually look at it as a scientist, you open up all kinds of, you know, Minis also look at groundwater, all kinds of Pandora's things come out of the box, you know, about why is it illegal and social norms, you know. So even this idea also that as a scientist, you have to also engage with other disciplines, yeah? So you might be a kind of a hydrologist, and therefore you have to be able to talk to an anthropologist now. So I think the stakes are going higher. So I think, to kind of conclude, because I have 42 seconds now, I'll finish with impact, you know. I think now you really have to think that ideally you want to have impact, but at the same time, I also want to say that we should also think that basic science is very important. I know it seems a contradiction, but it's not. Good science will always have a role in policy. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, Minnie, yeah.
So good morning, everyone, and thank you, Elena. I'll pick up on what you said about citizen science. I'm, of course, not a scientist, so I don't have a cool doctor in front of my name. And I do work with a lot of people who sometimes don't even know how to read and write. So what I thought I'd do is give you some part of the India story of the work that we're doing in India. And it all started in 1985 when a young man called Rajendra Singh went with 3 of his mates, bought a ticket to the last stop. 2 days later, they got off into this arid region, completely dry, very few people, all old people, women, children. The young people weren't there, and there was nothing growing over there. And the reason he'd done that was he was very inspired by Gandhi's ideals. I'm an Ayurvedic doctor, I would really like to give medicine, and his friends said that they'd like to give education to the poor of India, and that's why they went. But very soon they realized that the villagers weren't interested in the medicine or the education. And an old man told him, "Can't you see what we need? The region is so dry, we need water. Can you give us water?" And to which his response was, "I'm not an engineer. What do you mean give you water? I can't give you water." His 3 mates left saying, you can really never give them anything. They're hopeless. But Rajendra stayed on, and an old man told him that if you're willing to work hard, I can tell you how to give us water. Bring a spade and come tomorrow, and I'll show you what to do. And so the next day, Rajendra borrows a spade, and he goes running down the street. And you can imagine the scene, the village children all laughing behind him, and everybody thinking, the elders in the village all saying, these city boys, they never do any work. What's he carrying a spade for? But what then happened was very, very crucial and very interesting. The old man showed him the places in the landscape, the fractures, the fissures, and said, you start digging over here. And you dig. Don't ask me questions, you dig. And Rajendra dug. Eventually, the village joined him, the community joined him, and what got created was a water body. So India's weather pattern has summer, monsoon, and winter, and most of the water that is used throughout the year falls during the 4 months of the monsoon. So what was happening in that landscape was that the water was no longer being held. And why had that happened? Was successive governments had said, we'll give you water in a tap. This is all old-fashioned traditional knowledge. You don't need to bother about that. We'll give you water in a tap. What they didn't think about, the government, was that to give the water in the tap, the water has to have a source. So you have to replenish that source. So they dismissed that kind of wisdom totally, the community wisdom totally. Anyways, to cut a long story short, when the first rains came, the water filled up in the pond, and within 4 years, the river became perennial, and in 12 years, the river revived completely. It's been flowing ever since. And they didn't do it in just one river. They did it with 2, with 3, with 4, with 7, and now, of course, many other rivers. I can show you what actually happened. Femke, may I have the slide, please? I have very strict instructions from Casper, only 2 slides. But you'll see what I mean. And that he's been very generous to me. Actually, it should have been without slides. While Femke gets it on, I'll tell you, we can go further. Yes, second one, please. So that was the state of the river in 1985. And my colleague who actually did the work, Rajendra, I always hear his voice saying, do you think that's a road? That's not a road, that's a river. Next slide, please. And then after they did the work, that's the same spot. And that's the kind of work citizen science can do, traditional wisdom and community science can do. Now, very quickly, in the 2013 floods in the UK, I was watching a clip on BBC, and I saw them building somewhat similar structures and managing floods. And I remember calling up the people who were doing it, and that was actually Mark in the audience, and from the James Hutton Institute, and he invited me up. And I remember walking into this room full of scientists, terribly nervous. Oh my God, they're going to ask me all sorts of questions, figures, this, that, the other, and what am I going to say? And they actually, it was the same story I said, and they loved it. And at the end of which, I remember a question from Paul who said, but where's the evidence? And being Indian, I said, what evidence do you need? 7 rivers are flowing which hadn't been flowing for 80 years. For me, that's the evidence. How much more evidence do we need? And then, of course, we spend the rest of the afternoon talking about what evidence really is needed. How can we get governments to actually support this kind of work? So the UK budget for natural catchment work was 1 million in 2010, and today it's based on the evidence, it's 20 million, which is not huge, but at least in 10 years, you can see where they've gone with that. So what I wanted to bring out in that is that essentially, it is a nexus between three. It is a collaboration between three: the community, the government, and the scientist. If the scientists have to chase evidence and the government won't listen to them, then it's the community that will get on and do it. But ideally, what we ideally want is the three to have a breathable relationship where you each inform the other and then you make the right policy and then the right work happens. I'll stop here. Thank you.
Paul, can you see the thing okay? Yeah. Okay, grand. Paul.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, sorry for asking you for evidence. That's what scientists do, I'm afraid. But I think the nature of evidence is changing, and I'm very heartened that on many occasions the kind of science we do these days is more aligned to problem solving. So that's really where I'm coming from today. I'm not Gemma Carr, I apologise. Who want to see Gemma? She would be much more objective than me. So I have to declare my interest that I'm on the convening panel of the Great Debate, so I'm pretty much an unrepentant hands-on guy. And really, I want to pose a simple question, is that if we are going to do science and we are going to really solve some problems, and we really mean it, then we're going to have to start acting like it, really. So myself, I'm trained as a scientist, but a long time ago when I was standing on some man-made terraces in Spain, and basically these were man-made, and they were eroding very quickly and turning from lush green land, the opposite to your photographs, going from green land to desert. And we were standing on one terrace, and it was completely saturated, and we were studying and observing it, as we do. And you could see why it was saturated. It was just about to collapse, this terrace, is that the man-made channel had breached and the water was coming onto the terrace. And so I said, well, why don't we go and fix the channel? And everybody went, what? No, that's not our job. Our job is to observe. And that was my big change in my heart. I thought, no, I don't want to do this. When I go to a catchment, I want to solve the problems in the catchment. I don't want to go and observe the catchment. I will do observations, I will try and do science, but the most important thing is to solve the problem. So, so the first thing, I've got three little things I'd like to say. The first is, well, how are we training our scientists? Are we actually training our younger scientists to actually solve problems? That's really it. And if we are not, let's be very clear about it. Let's say, no, we're scientists, we value our science as it is, let's do it. Let's be hands off. Okay, we'll do the environmental science. Let's leave it to the environmental managers to do the management. So I think we need to think about that very carefully. I have been very encouraged in the last 20 years. So EGU 20 years ago never mentioned a human ever, I don't think. So we have a bit of a renaissance. I'm in a topic this afternoon, socio-hydrology and environment. And so we are changing, but at the same time, I'm a little bit worried that we may be doing some token hands-on activities. A lot of proposals these days will have included some sort of stakeholder engagement or transparent engagement or public participation or citizen science. And I'm just a little bit worried we're not really going all the way. So we're doing just enough, so really just enough hands-on to keep people away from us so we can justify our existence. So maybe you have a 3-year project, you drag in some farmers and you say, what are you growing? Why are you growing it? You shouldn't be doing this, you shouldn't be doing that. And you bring in the regulators and saying, look, your regulations are stupid. And then 3 years later, ping, stop. Bye, we're off now, goodbye. And that's how it works. So I'm very concerned that that's a reality. And finally, I think the last point is, who is communicating science for us? So we all have a role in that of communicating science, but I think we, as a community, we need to call upon the EGU and maybe the AGU or things like the IPCC to be much more active. So if we're going to be hands-on, let's be more active in terms of how we're campaigning as a group to solve problems. We should say, look, we've got knowledge. We need to articulate it. We need to get the politicians in the room with us and say, we are going to solve this problem. So if I just pick on the IPCC for a minute, they've been going for a very, very long time. I remember reading documents 25 years ago, and I really feel we should be much further on. I don't know if other people agree with that. It may be very unfair for me to say that. So I think we need to be a problem-solving entity as well as just good scientists. I was very keen to see that, that the EGU has brought out a journal called Geoscience Communication. Is that a reflection of that we're moving towards better communication of our science? Or is it a token gesture that we're not doing enough in our individual sciences, that we have to have a separate journal where we can put all the hands-on and all the engagement bits off to the side? So my conclusion is that we need science, as we've all agreed here, but we need to be hands-on. Okay? And if we are going to be scientists, we should prove that we're hands-on. That's what I'd like to say.
Okay, thank you. Okay, before I go out to the audience, I will just give each of our speakers just 2 minutes to respond to what each other have said, if there is anything you would like to respond to. So, Elena, is there anything you would like to? Don't forget you need.
Okay. Yeah, I think I was very taken by Minnie's comment, what evidence do you need when you have the 2 photos we showed. So I actually would like to throw it back to the audience. What do you think? What is it about how we show evidence that certain things that to the average person are obvious, they don't pass the post, as it were, of our scientific methods? So where is the problem? And I think, to reply to Paul, I still think there has to be a safe space for scientists, though, where we can still, it's a contradiction with what I just said, but that's why to me that it's up in the air about scientific evidence and how it is very robust. So, you know, it really stands to all kinds of criticism. And the IPCC, to me, I think is a good example of people that have been able to say, no, we still don't know. Don't force us to say things that are not ready yet, and we can't because the knowledge is not there. Some things take time, and I think politicians need to understand that sometimes good science needs more science. And I think, but also I'm very, very concerned about the incentives at the moment for young scientists, and what Paul said about why is it that transdisciplinary knowledge only goes into they don't pass a post either in the review process. I think that's a huge problem. And the incentives of publish or perish for young scientists, I think it's a very serious problem. And that's partly why I moved out of academia, actually. I got a bit tired of this publish or perish when I thought, well, 3 more papers, so what? You know, okay, my career will go up, but have I made any difference? No.
Okay, thank you.
So just to respond to that comment on publish or perish, I was saying last night that I'm probably one of the very few in the audience who's never written a paper, but what I have written is hundreds of funding applications for the work to be done. So I could do a whole thesis on that. But I also want to pick up on what Paul said and about we really do need that experience. And linked to that is that knowledge itself, gathering of knowledge itself isn't enough. It is the understanding of that knowledge that we need to really focus on. Once we gather it, do we understand it, and how can we work with it to in service of planet, people, and nature? For me, that is the most important. And when you have that kind of understanding, then it doesn't matter whether you're a scientist or a policymaker or a community. You're actually at one with all 3. So to understand the knowledge we gather is the crucial thing. I say hands-on for expertise with experience, and hands-off policy without community wisdom. Thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah, I didn't really mention the business of science. I think there's some very good businessmen out there doing some science and having rewards of many papers and other things, but we won't go there today. I did my PhD with Keith Bevan, so I was forced to do uncertainty analysis in great detail. And it was a truly depressing act, because when you look at complex systems, the uncertainty kills you every time. You cannot prove anything. You cannot make progress. So the nature of the science that we've been trying to do is to build confidence, okay? And when you go to a catchment, you may not have a long time series, and even if you did have a long time series, you won't be able to prove anything because nature is a mother. So if you go to a catchment, then what can you do? Well, very quickly, you can gather information as to why, what's actually malfunctioning in the system. And it's something as simple as growing crops for people screws the soil. It's really that simple. And therefore, we need to think how we're going to address that. And if all your water runs off and doesn't go into the aquifers, then you've got a malfunctioning catchment system, really. So I think we need to do things, so something as simple as, in my case, building these leaky dams in the north of England, or the Johads in Rajasthan. We're just holding water in the catchment. So if we hold water in the catchment, so we have a simple mantra of slow, store, filter. So everybody, slow, store, filter, slow, store, filter. Yeah, well, anyway, tough audience. But basically, we can quickly start to solve some problems with the community, and often we backfit the science afterwards.
Okay, thank you. Right, so we've had a few thoughts from our panel. I'm sure there are lots of thoughts out there. There's a few challenges being thrown out to you as well, I would say, in terms of questions posed to you, and in particular this question, is knowledge gathering enough, or is it not enough, as many has said quite strongly here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask people to put their hands up if they want to ask a question or make a point. I will take several points and questions at a time rather than just keep bringing the panel in. So do be aware that actually if someone asks something or makes a point that you want to respond to, you can actually respond to each other. You don't just have to respond to what's happening here. This is a conversation between all of us. So we're going to, are you able to, oh, thank you. We've got two people going to wander around with microphones. So if people would like to put hands up, and I'll get microphones distributed around to people who might want to speak. There's someone in the middle there. Yeah, thanks, Mark. Actually, yeah, if you... Yeah.
Hello?
Okay, that's great. Yeah, please, far away, yes.
So I would like to ask a question to Paul. I like your idea with hands-on, and you mentioned the IPCC. How do you handle hands-on on something that is invisible, takes a long time to see, longer than human living time, or is just too far away of the people causing the problem? How do you handle hands-on there?
Okay, thank you. Mark, there was someone just here, yeah, if you want to bring that down. And the person who's got the mic, yes.
Yeah, I'm here. What I believe is that all of us more or less actively are hands-on while doing science. The question, I think, is how we should be hands-on. Because people are going much more far from us, with the fake news spreading. They are less believing science. So we should understand how being hands-on.
Okay.
So the question is how.
Right, thank you. Right, if we could get that microphone across to there, and then I'll come over to you next. Yeah.
Yeah, hello. I have a question to the three of you, or generally. I'm very much in favor of being hands-on as a scientist, but what I see is that many scientists are afraid of getting political, because that's kind of absolutely the opposite of what people believe a scientist should be, totally objective and never really take a political stance. So how can we address that? How can we how can we be political and scientists at the same time?
Yeah, I do think this is quite a key part of what this whole debate's about. So I am interested in people's responses to this question from the audience, as well as questions, of course. Yeah, okay, so who's got the mic there?
Yeah.
I've lost you. There you are, yes.
Yes, thank you. I very much agree with the points brought forward by the panel, and I think we should be much more hand-on than we are now. However, I think the whole publish or perish, and if you're a little bit in a more senior position, acquiring enough funding for PhD students or perish, is really blocking us, because it always seems, everybody seems to say, okay, hands-on is important, we have to reach out more, we have to involve stakeholders more, but at the end of the day, there's only 24 hours in a day, and writing the paper or writing the grant proposal comes first, and then there's very little time left to do the actual hands-on. So how do we effectuate the paradigm shift needed to give hands-on the priority that is needed to really make a change?
Okay, thank you. There was someone just a couple of rows behind, if you could pass that one, and yeah.
All right, so I'll raise my hand, it's too late to back down. So yeah, I want to react first to what Paul Quinn was saying about creating an institution which would maybe mostly act for going to this hands-on direction. But don't you think that all this problem of publish or perish and all this problem of defiance against authority is exactly because somehow scientists became an authority by not really being, how can I say, efficient into education. I mean, filling the gap between the scientific community and the people. Like, if you can fill this gap, people will get interested again in science in general, and like all these policy makers will direct it in the direction of the flow, right? Then it makes sense.
Okay, thank you. Can you bring that down to the front? There's a couple of people here, and yes, please. Yeah.
Hi. I wanted to ask a question to the panelists, and particularly to Elena, who I'm sure is dealing with policymakers in my country, in Spain. So, one question is, how do we make our science available to the society? But there's another question on how do the policymakers, or how do we make the policymakers to listen to us? So how do we break that barrier? How do we convince policymakers that our science is necessary, and how do we interact with them?
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. Was there someone? No? Yeah, just a moment. I want to move the mic first, just so that I don't interrupt you with the... hands up? Yeah, okay. If you could get it over there, please. Okay, go.
So we're talking about how to be hands-on, and yeah, that like the science we put out there is actually used to affect the policy making. So what's the best way for that to happen? And should scientists be more involved politically, directly involved with the political process? So we see a lot of lawyers, economists running for offices, but not so many scientists, I feel like. So should scientists be more represented in our governments, our institutions?
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. Yeah.
So I wanted to say that my feeling is that no longer the time to ask the question hands-on or hands-off, because we are asked to be hands-on. Because I've seen, I'm at Columbia University in New York, and I can see all of my colleagues involved in hands-on work. Whether it comes from the local government or it comes from other countries, through different ways, we are asked to be hands-on. And the question is, some of the people already asked, is how to be best to be hands-on. And I'm not even talking about involvement in politics. It's not politics. It's people who want to know what we have to do in order to be prepared for climate change, for example, or climate variability, for that matter.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I think that's interesting, because that's the completely the other side of the coin. I mean, is there anyone who really thinks that we should be hands-off and that scientists should be scientists? I mean, we'll see as we go around. We've got someone back there.
So, first of all, I would like to say that I'm really happy to hear that many people are hands-on. And I also hear many people ask the question how to be hands-on, and then some people say, how can we best be hands-on? I think you don't have to be best at be hands-on. Just start getting engaged. If you want to get engaged in the politics, just do it. I have seen recently a documentary in the Netherlands about how regional politics They just don't know. They don't have the knowledge. So just get engaged. Another thing I would like to say is that as a deep-time climate scientist, we work a lot on climate in the past, and I've heard things about IPCC being maybe uncertain. I think by now we can say we are certain that it was really warm in the past and it will be warm in the future. Related to that, I would like to share a small anecdote and then I'm done. I'm in a climate scientist group, and last week I had a discussion about flying. And if you have a discussion about flying and then someone in your own group who knows everything about climate change asks you to present new arguments, then we have a serious problem, okay? That's just what I wanted to share.
Okay, thank you. I think I'll bring the panel back in, and then I'll come back out again. So is there, and don't try and respond to everything, of course, but is there anything you would like to respond to, Elena?
I think I like the last intervention. I think with your questions, you've actually made me think, which is really quite nice. I think we're all thinking together. I think that's a major. I think that's actually very important that we do create this space that Caspar has facilitated. I think to me, then it's time to think, okay, I think most of us think it's hands-on, but I would argue there's different types of being hands-on, right? So the last question, maybe some scientists can actually step into the political arena, right? That's one option. I also know of a case in a Costa Rican scientist. He works on isotopes in groundwater, and he ensured that the Costa Rican parliament now will have a fee to pay for science, good science. So that's another way of being an activist, is to make sure that you get science paid for. I think in terms of, with the IPCC, I think for me that was the toughest question, because some science really needs time. And as I say, the safe space has to be there. But maybe you need science translators, so people that really understand about this kind of interface, this kind of gray space where you translate that knowledge and make sure that it has an impact and that the politicians actually act on it. I think, in my experience, for example, interacting sometimes with the Commission, for example, quite often they're desperate for evidence. They actually have very little good knowledge sometimes. Or, no, they do have knowledge, but in a kind of packaged way that they can act on it. That's another one. And I think the last one is that there's a lot of tools to collaborative modeling, workshops, based on networks. I mean, there's lots of new tools now that are coming up, scientifically very robust, that actually bring people directly into the interface. And then the last question on Spain, I think I was very proud. It's actually been very difficult. They're not here, so that's good. We actually got a river basin agency to lead a Horizon 2020 project. It's like mixing oil and water, because we're a startup, and they are an institution that comes from Franco's time. But I would say I would do it again. I really would. Because that, to me, is change.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you.
So I wanted to pick up on science. Good, honest science does exist. I mean, I know this whole thing about publish and perish and what's driving people. Of course, it makes people fed up to produce yet another paper and yet another paper. But within all that, there are some really good papers and really good science which communities do need. In that conversation we were having about the evidence with Paul many years ago, was the fact that the work that they had done was backed up by good, honest science, for which they won the award for the work in Belford. And that good, honest science was done by good, honest scientists. And that good, honest science was then picked up by the government, and they did, then the budget did go from 1 million to 20 million. So it's also down to each one of us, is where do we want to draw the line? You want to see the impact of all the research that you've put your heart and soul into. So if you can do a bit of both, starting point is do a bit of both, and then eventually move totally into the kind of hands-on impact that your work you can give with the research work that you've done. I think I'll stop there.
Okay, the first question was absolutely brilliant. Thank you. Totally impossible question. But I think I was asking that question to myself 25 years ago, very frustrated, feeling impotent that we couldn't actually solve a problem, especially like the climate change one. So I spent 25 years thinking, well, what's the best I can do here? And so the topics I would actually encourage you to look at is Earth systems engineering. So it's got the word engineering in it, you know, but there's Earth system sciences, but then there's Earth systems engineering. And that is a problem-solving agenda that appreciates that the systems are complex, but if you can create a healthy system, then you stand a chance of maybe having the smaller system working makes the bigger system healthy. So I would encourage you to ask yourself questions as citizens. So, you know, do you know what the quality of the air is that you're breathing? Do you know where your river is? Is your river clean? Last time it flooded, do you know why it flooded? So the very hard question about we've got to do our day job. Your day job should be 80-20. It's a random number. 80% do your day job, 20% be hands-on. Go to your local school, go to your local river, be active, and try and solve your own problem. Bring your sciences to your own area and deploy it. And even if it's not really your topic, you can still go there and push the science through. So I really think that the trick, what I do is catchment systems engineering, is we ever go to a catchment, the politicians come to us. We make them build the wetlands. We make them sit in rooms full of angry people who are very frustrated about flooding and pollution, and we get them to be part of the system. And therefore they solve the system with the community in situ. And I think that's the only hope we've got. And if we do enough of that, then the local system becomes healthy. It makes the broader system become healthy. And maybe one day the climate system will become healthy too.
Can I just quickly add to that? No?
I will bring you back in a while, but I want to come back out. There's some interesting questions about process, and I think a lot of the panel are on a very similar page. So I'm quite interested in, because obviously the audience, we're all from different backgrounds and different approaches. You know, some of these questions about the way in which science can be used. Some of these questions that were in the introduction, you know, about what does it mean for democracy? You know, there's a lot of talk about evidence-based policy, for example, but is that democratic if you've actually got scientists, you know, advising policymakers? This is where some of the IPCC thing is, you know, there are some interesting questions. I don't have the answers at all. I'm just interested to hear what you think about these aspects of this whole discussion as well. You don't have to answer those in particular. I'm just throwing them out there. Also, I think there are some real tensions that are coming out from what people were saying and from what's being said on the panel about people working to their strengths, in that, you know, we aren't all good at being hands-on. We aren't all good at being out in the field. We aren't all people. You know, some of us are scientists who are very good at sort of very focused and working in the lab. And is there anything wrong with that? Should that actually still be encouraged? Is it up to someone else to take that work out? You know, so these aren't straightforward questions, and not everybody can do everything. And if we do, we're probably too split to achieve anything as well. So anyway, all those things to think about. We've still got plenty of time. So I will look for hands again. And if people can put their hands up so that I've got an idea, and I'll do it in areas. So I know we've got at least a couple down here and a couple down here. So I'll sort of start from the front, and then I'm going to sweep back, okay? So there were two here, and so if we could have one of them down here. Sorry to make you walk all the way down, but yeah.
Okay, I think we have to distinguish between two things. There are maybe specific problems at a certain spot where we can do some research and help people to solve that specific problem. And on the other hand, there are the problems of the policy world, like climate change, what should we do, and the kind of how should we help or influence policy. And there I think scientists have to take another position that the other actors in the policy world, than the lobbyists. And so they should give advice, but they should not expect that policy is just doing what science is telling them. Mm-hmm. So we have, as scientists, we have to understand the political world. there are other arguments than scientific ones. So there are worldviews, there are questions that science cannot answer about how we think about risks, how we deal with risk, and so on. So we have to be in a position to tell them maybe the options, what they could do if they want to reach or to solve a certain problem, and so on. And a second, I think, important point is that we as scientists, we don't go to people and tell them just the results of our research. What is very important, that they give an assessment of the current state of knowledge. IPCC is a very good example for that. So we should tell them where scientists agree and where they don't agree. So that the worst thing is if one expert says one thing and the other one says another thing. That doesn't help anything. So we should be honest and tell where we agree with others and where we don't agree. Yeah. So there are a lot more to say about that. But
yeah. Okay.
Stop here.
Thank you. That's a very useful contribution. Who's got the mic? Is there? Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks very much. It's fantastic to hear what everyone's got to say. I'm really enjoying the debate. It's got me thinking. If we're talking so much about scientists being hands-on with the public, we haven't talked much about how we can help the public to be more hands-on with science. And I think that's something we really should consider. And maybe that comes about through helping the education process to help people not necessarily study science or be interested in science, but at least know how to ask a question that they might find interesting. And I also think, given that scientists so often find the publish or perish problem really prohibitive for being hands-on with the public, there might be some ways that we can try and help improve that situation. For example, we currently go by the method where the publish or perish applies just to peer-reviewed journals, but maybe there should be more incentive for some kind of credit for publishing in newspapers or other places where the public is more likely to read and not just scientists. And I've also often wondered whether there's room for having some kind of public engagement in the scientific peer review process. So I'm sure there would be quite a lot of people around the world who are not scientists who would be interested still in peer reviewing science articles. And that may not be true for all science, so maybe not everyone reading particle physics papers, but for some areas of science which are generally applicable to the whole community, perhaps there could be more community engagement in the peer review process itself.
Yeah, interesting thought. Yeah, if you could pass that along. And who's got the mic?
On the point about democracy and evidence, I think it actually, having evidence inform the policy discussions actually enables more democratic dialogue, because if we don't have evidence informing that, then it's going to create a void where decisions aren't necessarily going to be in the public interest. And I think we need to, ultimately we need to decolonize science, as the previous speaker said. We need to make sure that people are armed with scientific knowledge that allows them to advocate, so non-scientists need to have that. And so I think that's where the public engagement comes in, is that a lot of this doesn't have to be scientists running for office. It can be us sharing what we know and how to navigate the science on a policy relevant topic. And that's something we need to do more of. And to the other point on, we sort of frame this as a binary hands-on or hands-off, but it's of course a big spectrum in terms of running for office down to signing a letter, staying informed. And I suspect a lot of the hands-off people have selected to not be in this room right now. And so I just want to acknowledge that the vast majority of scientists are hands-off. And so how do we, if we think that needs to be changed, how do we do that? And I'm curious to hear the panelists discuss how can we change the culture so that people feel they can do these different activities along the spectrum and either create the time or the capacity or the cultural permission to do those things.
Okay, there was someone here. Yeah, I know, but I need to move the mic first. Where was it? There was someone just there? Yeah. Okay, so go on. Yes, go on. Yes,
Again?
Yes, please.
We have a structural problem to handle. The politics will never be ready to listen to the scientist when the scientist is ready, and vice versa. So one has to study how this interface is organized. And I think there is quite some substantial scientific work done by people who study social processes. For example, I think about Edenhofer and Kovacs' works out of the IPCC context. Mm-hmm. The next problem is certainly packaging our science in a way that is understandable. Is also what needs requires to bring people in who have these skills. But last not least, and that's for me the question to all of us, I am part of the networks of the politicians. I am part of the networks of the administrators. I am part of the network of the journalists. Do I make them knowing here is a scientist who is willing you can talk to do? This is on a very day-to-day level, because then these people, knowing their difficulties, will know somebody to whom they may wish to talk. So I think the grassroots activity is making us as scientists, individuals in our local communities, known, in order that people, when they have an issue, even if it's not in my field, would come to me and one could move things forward. And I think so there's a lot of hands-on which is possible to be done on us when we understand us being more than just scientists, living in the communities, and making us to be networked by others.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. If you could get the mic, there's a chap there in the light blue shirt. Yeah. Thank you. Where is it? There. Yeah.
It's my turn. Thank you very much. I think this is a very interesting debate. I must admit I'm sort of a strange bird in this group. I'm not a geoscientist, I'm a mathematician. Mm-hmm. And as you can imagine, as a mathematician, we have even worse problems communicating to the public. But I'm definitely in the hands-on community. Two statistics. First of all, I'm from the United States. I work in Washington, D.C. Two statistics that really made me get involved in the hands-on community. One is that half the population of the United States has never met a scientist. The second statistic is there are 435 congressmen and 100 senators in the federal government. There is one PhD, physics. So our community, whether it's geosciences or mathematics or physics, doesn't matter, has let the situation get worse. We were sleeping at the wheel, and in the meantime, the lawyers have taken over, the lawyers and the economists. Mm. And I think that has put us at our disadvantage. So how did I get involved in the hands-on community? I'm involved in the Society for Industrial and Applied Mathematics, which has a committee for science policy. And I've been on that committee for about 10 years. Once a year, we go to Capitol Hill and advocate. I shouldn't say lobby, we advocate for science. In fact, right now, as I'm sitting here, my group is at Capitol Hill, well, at least later this afternoon, to visit with various congressmen and senators in their office and speak to their staff. So over the years, we have built a good relationship with staff members. You don't necessarily speak to the congressman or the senator, but to his or her technical staff. And these people are, amazingly enough, very bright. They're in their 20s or 30s. They've had a scientific education, more or less, and you can talk to them, and you can explain to them. And our whole purpose is not to tell them what we do, but to open them up and let them talk, and we find out what they want. I think this is a very important aspect of advocacy. And as a result, as the previous speaker mentioned, we have built up over the years a network where they come to us to ask for advice. And I think that's the best position you can put yourself in. It takes a long time, but eventually the message will get through and you get the support that you're asking for.
Okay, thank you. Is there someone over there, Mark? Yeah.
Here? May
Yes,
I ask?
please.
We had a great debate on a great conference, so I would like to ask some basic question connected to this. Namely, what are the main rules which should govern us as a scientist? The rules which allow us to sustain the high respect we still have in the societies. The rules which allow us to sustain the dialogue between us as a scientist and between politicians. And I think defining these rules here would help us to answer where we should keep our hands on or off. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I think I'll bring the panel back in. I'll let you get, after you. And then we'll come back out to the audience again. We'll probably only get one more round in. So the next round, put your hand up at the beginning, and I'll try and get a sense of how many we need to fit in and so on. But yes, so you, and then we'll come to the panel.
Okay, thanks for letting me have this. So I would like to comment on a mathematician in America, and also to a comment from the last round, roaring about being a scientist and being politically at the same time. I think also being political, we want politicians to be evidence-based and to be rational. So I don't think it's a contradiction. And maybe our sciences, we should make it clear that this is appreciated, that we want scientists to be politically active, and appreciation is best expressed by funding. So maybe, especially in such network building, we should, as European Geoscience, think about more programs. Maybe they exist, but I'm not aware of them. Programs to exchange, also in a reaction to some other commentary, to exchange people from science and people from politics, like, fellowships or, exchanges, really, programs to bring people together, to establish this network very early on. But this would need funding, so that people who have to also publish, not to perish, have the money to do this. So what's our role here as European Geoscience? Give us some money and we do maybe some more hands-on.
Yeah, okay, thank you. I'll start at that end for a change. Paul, if you want to comment on anything that's
Okay,
been said.
that was an excellent round of how we should do it, and I think it's really good. But whatever it is, let's do it together. That's the thing. So, I think a social scientist came to me and said, Paul, did you know that you're doing action research, taking the perturbationist approach? I thought, am I? Fantastic. Okay, it's nice to know that somebody was watching what we're doing. There is a science for it. And the more people we have working together in situ, so even though it's local, it is very pivotal that the people who are working together to solve a local problem don't just solve the local problem. I think they have a transition. I think, Minnie, you would refer this to the spirit into the project, but I think it's a reconnection. So once the scientists are reconnected, I think there's a much better opportunity for us to say, let's do the type of science, the hands-on science. And the network is, to me, is the system. So you should be trying to impact the system just a little bit. If everybody does a little bit of good in the system, then the system becomes healthy.
Thank you. Minnie.
I want to pick up what Paul had said earlier about, I'll answer your question first, actually. How can we help the public be more hands-on with science? And I think that is very, very crucial. I find that a lot in our work, that when we keep the scientists separate and everybody gets into their little silos, we forget that we are all part of that same community. And how do we cross-fertilize utilize what we know. And in the project in India, that is what worked. Finally, eventually, the government did have to listen because the government was also part of the community that was living there and suffering from the lack of water. And then eventually, they all brought their expertise or their little a bit that they could help with in, and then it moved from one river to another, to another, to another. So I completely agree. It has to become easier for the layperson to understand what the scientist and the government is talking about as well. And I think one way of doing that, which I saw in the Belford example and our example, is that all the stakeholders, when they come into a project, they give something. And when you give something to a project, you own it and then give of yourself. I think that's one of the biggest steps we can take in terms of engaging with the science community, government, and what we need to do further.
Thank you. Elena.
Yeah, I think the first thing is, I've been taking notes, and hopefully with Mark and Casper, whatever, I think we've had some, I think, very good ideas come out from this session, which I think should not just remain as ideas. They should also be implemented. That's the world that I inhabit now. When you don't just have an idea, you actually also do it and implement it. I really like the comment on the spectrum. I think that actually is a very useful way. So maybe as a scientist, you have to navigate and say, okay, where do I see myself? And maybe sometimes you're more hands-off because you have to be. And sometimes you really have to be hands-on. And then my next comment would be, what is the role of the EGU in this? You know, how do you train scientists? How do you support scientists to navigate this spectrum? So we should change the curriculum, for example, in universities. We should have specific courses. I thought the idea of the exchanges is absolutely fantastic. Let's inhabit each other's worlds, you know, like the case of the mathematician, you know. Absolutely, you know. And also, I think we should really also engage a lot with politicians and policymakers. They're not the same, by the way. Because then you will understand. In one project we're doing, it was a key area, and we started off the project, and there was one key sector that we were supposed to deliver results. Because we interviewed this particular sector, in this case it was the insurance world, we interviewed them before the project started. I can tell you now, we had two main advantages. One is it changed dramatically, completely, the basis of how we were pitching the project, basically. It really rewired it, because we could co-design it. And we knew then that it would have much more relevance. So sometimes before you go off, you know, it is important to engage with these people. So yes, just be engaged.
All right, thank you. Oh, sorry, I've got this one. Right, I'm going to come back out to you. This is probably the last round. We've only got just over a quarter of an hour, well, about 20 minutes left. So I'll try and take everybody if I possibly can. So people who want to, can everybody put their hands up, just so I've got an idea of how many I'm trying to get through? It's not as many as I thought. Okay, that's not too bad. All right, I'm going to start at the back this time. So Mark, if you want to come over this side, and then if you want to go this, yes, Mark, if you want to go over that side. So, sorry to make you move, but I just like to make him run around, really. There's a person in the middle here towards the back who's got their hand quite high up, and there was someone just there. Yes, I'll take you first, and then we'll come over here.
Okay, so I wanted to talk about, I've been hearing a lot of people say, how do you get engaged? And one of the important things, we've been talking a lot on the big scale in terms of what you can do starting to interact with your government, but we're missing also the point about just going to your local communities, and that I think can have a huge impact. I'm doing the opposite, where I actually am working with large government and international entities. And I want to point out that there's a lot of fellowships out there, and normally they're just like 1 year long, if not more, that you can do. So as a US citizen, for example, the Triple ACE fellowship can get you involved with the US government for a year or even longer, working in an executive branch or a judicial branch or congressional branch. of the US government. AGU also has fellowships to work in congressional branches of the government. EGU probably does as well. Just look out there. But on top of fellowships to actually commit a year or more of your life to something that you're not used to doing, you can go to symposium that are run by different agencies, for example, that focus on things like pollutants in soils or storing carbon in soils, or since obviously I'm a soil scientist, that's what I know about. but there's a lot of other symposium out there. So if there's an agency that you're interested in, go ahead, see if they have symposium that are occurring that upcoming year and go to them and speak. The other way, as somebody else said, to get involved is to be really good at what you do. And if you're really good at what you do, eventually you probably will have agencies reach out to you as well. But yeah.
Okay, thank you. And there was someone just a couple along from you somewhere there. I've lost them now. Over there, yeah, if you come across to this guy, yeah, you've just turned your head with the glasses and white shirt. I'm trying to work from the back forward so that we sort of get everybody. Okay, the person with the mic there, can you, yeah.
So I guess one of the things is being able to have the time for kind of, I guess, outreach and like even working with the grassroots. And I'm still a PhD student, and I feel like I have time for that, but it very much depends on, like, for supervisors for early career scientists. So perhaps part of the thing should be within PhD programs is students should feel like they're able to put that time in, and there should be maybe training within the programs. And so it should be clear, for example, old scientists that their students should be able to spend some of their time on these projects and not just purely working on their PhD research.
Okay, thank you. I've got a bit confused. Is that mic there? Yeah.
Yeah, I've got one here. I had, before my comment, I just wanted to respond to the earlier comment about 50% of Americans not having met a scientist, and that just can't be true because I don't believe 50% of Americans haven't visited their doctor or weren't taught at school by someone with a science degree. And perhaps this is part of the problem, is that we need to increase the public's diversity of what they think a scientist is. A scientist is not an old white man with a beard with a lab coat on. It's architects and doctors and, even people with botanists who might work in garden centres, for example. And it's not all or nothing. They can engage in many different ways. And that will help public literacy in science if they don't just think it's a blackboard full of chalk maths equations. But my actual comment I wanted to make, which comes back to, I think, many people's comments and worries about us having the time. And this is that as scientists, I think we can be very independent. We can be our own electrician and our own plumber in the lab, and then we produce our own graphics in terms of figures. We have to do everything. We write our own papers. This does not always happen in industry. They pass things off to graphics designers and that sort of thing. And so we don't need to take all this on ourselves. It's great if we want to interact, but we should be encouraging the employment of middlemen, as it were, to help us, people who have these skills and who we can talk to. And I know it's hard as scientists to take that risk because people might miscommunicate what we're telling them, but I think if we do take that risk, then it will help us find the time to do this, to work with specialists.
Okay, thank you. There were a couple of hands near you. Yes, if you just pass it along to, yeah. Okay, yeah.
Hi. In the interest of a debate, I'm going to play devil's advocate and argue for hands-off. And the question is liability. So I'm a volcanologist, and in hazard management, so like the Aquila disaster, a lot of scientists got themselves in trouble for saying things that weren't scientifically accurate, and then a lot of people died. It's not a volcanologist's job to set an exclusion zone. It's their job to provide the policymakers with enough evidence so that they can make decisions. And we know as scientists that it's not a black and white issue in any case. So for example, in the interest of climate change debate, as a modeler, you know that there are flaws in your model, but you know that the overwhelming evidence says that there's anthropogenic climate change going on. It's very difficult to bring that to a debate with a staunch climate denialist, saying, are you certain of your data? He's like, well, no, I know that there's some bugs in there, but it can't be the same bug in every single thing. And it's very difficult for someone to be able to argue that. And you can't have the time to do research and that at the same time. So I think I think that scientists don't necessarily need to be hands-on. We just need better policymakers, or like the previous speaker said, better middlemen, middle women as well.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, can you pass it back just a couple of rows to this? I've been trying to get it to you for ages, haven't I? Right, can we, yes.
I fully agree with what was just said, but we all know we need to be hands-on these days. And I think one of the key factors of being able to be hands-on is communication. And I think we as scientists, we communicate primarily through publishing and publishing papers. And most of these avenues are not accessible to the public. And in fact, most of our research is publicly funded. So somewhere there needs to be a bridge to bridge this gap in communication. And I think it's imperative that that happens now. So, yeah.
Okay, thank you. And yeah, if we could bring it over, yeah. Yeah.
So first of all, I'm a bit wondering why we're talking about being open to everyone, to the public, and no one stands up here. So there's no chance for anyone to go back to any comment after the session because you simply don't know who talked. That's why I stand up. So I'm very thankful for the two comments before. So first of all, I would say we're scientists, and what we should do most is good science. And we can't be both. We can't be a politician who does good politics and good science at the same time. That's just not possible. But I want to share one experience, what I did during my PhD at Forschungszentrum in Jülich in Germany. I guided visitor groups around the center, and that were pupils from very young age up to really old people. And I told them what I was working on, I told them about my project, I told them why I was excited on it, and I also told them why I was sometimes frustrated on it. And I think that's the best way to get encouraged with people and to talk to people. And if every one of us would talk to 200 people per year, you can easily count how many people we would reach by that. And we would not need Twitter or anything else like that. Just communicate directly with the people. I think that's the best way to solve this.
Okay, thank you. There was someone, yeah, if we can, just over to the side of where that chap was, there's someone with a hand there, with their hand up currently. So sorry to make it go all the way around. Okay.
So one problem we found with science communication is that the public views scientists as privileged elite that fly to international conferences and sit in big halls and debate on how they should live their lives. And in some ways that's true because we don't represent a true cross-section of society. We've had the opportunities for higher education. So how do you think we overcome that image and get over our own bias when we might not understand what the average person, member of the public, what challenges they have in their day-to-day lives, and how climate and things might not be very high up on their list of priorities?
Okay, thank you. There was someone in the middle here who had their hand up. I've lost them. Is there anyone else on this side? Over here, Mark, there's a guy with a Czechy shirt, is that? Yeah. Right.
Okay, so I'm also going to stand up because I completely agree. I'm going to keep it short because I already spoke before, and there's one thing I haven't heard yet, which I hope that someone else was going to say: practice what you preach. And I also say that to myself because whenever you say something, you're also convincing yourself. Sometimes we also need to settle down from this ivory tower and practice what we preach. What do you think what all these people that never meet a scientist think when they see all these scientists fly across the world to EGU, emitting a shitload of CO2, sorry for cursing? This is not really helping us at all. So practice what you preach.
Mm-hmm. Just out of interest, how's the Twitter poll going? Have a look while we have the next person speak. Go on. Yes, please. Yeah. Someone. Hands over this side. There. Yeah, there. Here. Okay. Sorry. Go on.
So there definitely is this perception of ivory tower scientists that are often, when they do engage the public, they are just telling the public what to do. And I think that's a big issue when we do engage with the public, because the politicians decide what's important, and we can tell them how to do what's important. But I think the easiest way to overcome this ivory tower idea of what scientists are is to simply ask people what they need, and then do the scientists, the science that tells them how they can get what they need. And that's where I think a lot of our focus needs to be on.
Okay, thank you. Was the person just in front of you with a hand or not? Did you want to ask them? No. Sorry, I thought we had one there. Is there any more down here? I thought there was another hand somewhere here. No? We've given up.
Okay, I stand up also. I suppose there are good reasons also for the hands-off strategy. In this discussion, I have the sense that it is implicitly is that hands-on means it's for the good causes, but it's not naturally good causes. I think history has shown that it can also be used for the bad causes. So in that respect, I think the two things that are very important, and that's independence of the scientist and integrity. And the first speaker usually said there's no need to be naive in this case, because there are a lot of forces out there that will use our science for their causes, which may be not that good. So in some sense, I think some kind of democratic control of all the work that we do is needed. In that respect, of course, communication, as also first speaker said, is vital. It's really needed to have some kind of, be able to communicate what we do in our science to the people. Because if not, we're just experts, and expert ruling community is, well, that can be dramatic. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. There was someone just over to your left. Oh, well, okay, yeah. And then if you pass it to the person in front of you afterwards. But there's someone back there. Who's got the mic? Oh, it's there.
Yeah, to connect to the couple of comments earlier, I think most of us are best at getting hands-on with science. This is what we do. This is what we like to do. It's kind of scary to get hands-off with other things like politics or something. And we're also not necessarily good at it. But still, many of us are maybe frustrated that we have a feeling that we are not being heard properly. Fake news spread like hell easily, but our latest research doesn't, so why is that? And it's also maybe part of this feeling that people think we live in an ivory tower and we do our crazy work that nobody understands. And the reason is that many of us, or I don't know, yeah, I think many of us are not good communicators. We're good in science, but we cannot really communicate it. We speak a language that nobody else understands. It's complicated, and really to take it down to an easy level and to make it understandable why it's necessary and important, that is an important task. And I don't know how to improve it. Maybe we could learn it. Maybe some universities or societies could take care of teaching it to us. Or they could take this task from us researchers and take care that our research is being heard.
Okay, thank you. And if we could get the mic over to there, yeah, and yeah, these two here, and then we'll probably have to call it after that. Go, yeah. Yes.
Hey, my name is Sergio. I'm from Chile, and I'm doing my postdoc in Brazil. Okay, so we are from Latin America, and I would like to share my experience with hands-on. You know, I firstly recommend that you have to build trust. Okay, I go to the local traffic engineering company, which is the office that make the planning of the city. Okay, and this is very important. So I develop a software which can tell you how is going to be the pollution, the CO2, and you know that when you have more pollution, you're going to have more deaths and ecosystemic services, etc. So I go once per week for free, you know, with a free software per week to this office and tell them if they're going to build the city in any way. If they're going to construct a new metro, a new subway, how are going to be the environmental consequences of that? And you know, that's only building trust and overpassing the bureaucracy, no money in that. And that's what I wanted to share with you. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And if you pass it to the person in front of you, just if you had your hand up. Oh, do you not want to ask now? No? No, okay. Right, last question then, or last point.
Yeah, I would like to reply to what has been said here and also here with the middleman, that maybe it is, we are asking too much for many scientists to ask them to do good science and publish papers and communicate with the public and getting involved.
Yeah, do it all.
So maybe we need more people, more jobs created in the society for people whose only job it is to understand the science and translate it to the public. And do this via many channels, like if it's YouTube or newspapers or anything. But yeah, people who know the science, who have studied science, maybe even have done research for some time, have got a PhD, but then whose only job it is to translate the science.
Yeah. Okay. All right, thanks. I'm going to have to bring the panel in. I'm just going to give you a minute each just to respond to a point or whatever. The idea isn't to try and cover everything. Yes, Elena, if you would like to comment first.
Yes, I think as summary, I would say 4 points. One, the idea that science is everywhere. It's not just with the scientists, so I encourage people to engage with communities, as Minnie said, because there's lots of good things there. I like the idea of 80-20% from Paul, but maybe it could be, sometimes it can be 100 and 0, or it can be then 80 and 20, the other way. And maybe through your life, that will change. You know, as a comment before from the professor and the younger ones, when you're in a safe position, maybe you can actually engage more, while maybe, and then change incentives. You know, the publish or perish, I still think it remains a problem. And make systems much more permeable. You know, the exchange idea and other things from the front that I've heard, I think are great. And I think the other thing that I think I really is, and that's my last comment, in the real world, the problems are really getting very serious. We are all geoscientists. We know that the system now has changed, and we have big water quality problems, climate variability, possibly climate change. So we all will be needed in the real world, because otherwise they will use knowledge that is possibly outdated or is incorrect or is just not the best science. So. Okay, thank you. Minnie.
I want to echo a lot of what Elena said and a lot of what the audience said, and that it is about communication, and often the misconception, or sometimes you do find yourself in an ivory tower. Have the courage to come out. Have the courage to simplify your message. Anybody can make things complicated, but have the courage to make your message, your science, your work simple enough for your local community to understand. Maybe that can be one part of your work. And then there is real communication. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, one specific point to the volcanologists, because we have the same problem with flooding, that if we start issuing saying you're safe now, we're in big trouble. But the approach that we have when we're installing all these nature-based solutions, which people are very skeptical about, we have this approach called no regrets. Okay, so you do it and you're not accountable. Okay, I think that's very important, that you feel safe and feel in an environment where you can give solid advice based on your experience. Finally, I think in the UK, we have these things called impact case studies, and it scores for the university. But there is still a big gap between the impact case studies and the science, the publish or perish side, we've called it. And I think we need to get the value of the impact case studies to be equal to the papers and the big projects. So the sense I'm picking up is that we are talking about hands-on. Maybe all the people who are hands-off are not here. That's a very good point. Yeah. But if we are hands-on, then we've really got to get serious about it. And we've got to make sure that the entities that represent us, such as EGU, are also very serious about being hands-on.
Okay, thanks, Paul. Mark, what's the result? Is there a result?
Yeah. So the result from the poll that's been running on Twitter is quite interesting. With 40 votes, it finished 75% yes, 5% no, and 20% undecided.
Right, okay. So most people are in favour of hands-on. Okay. Where's that coming from? Okay, first of all, I would like to, I can't take any more questions now, I'm afraid, but I'd like to thank you lot for joining the conversation. It's been really great, so a clap to you. And of course to our panel who set the scene for us so ably, so if we could thank them as well. And thanks to my helpers as well. Thank you.
Thank you.